All right, ZeoCharge dosing, right? Hot topic. This is, how much ZeoCharge should I take? This is really one of the top questions I get, and it's an important question. And unfortunately, there's no perfect answer because there's no way to know exactly for sure, what is the exact perfect dose for each person, right? We can only offer general recommendations. So that's where sometimes, some experimentation and personalization um, is helpful, and sometimes the dose will change too based on what's going on in your life. If you have more toxic stressors at one time than another, right? So there's a lot of factors, but we're going to go over some just some general principles of ZeoCharge dosing to help you kind of guide you on the path to determine how much you think might be a good dose for you, right? So a few of the principles: one would be don't microdose it. Another one would be the healthier you are, the less you need. Another principle is if you experience a reaction, take more, not less. And then the last principle is more is better within a reason, right? And of course, there's always going to be exceptions to this. These are just general rules. What we found has worked really well. So starting with don't microdose. So a lot of the traditional approach with detox and a lot of supplements in general, especially for individuals that are more sensitive to reactions to various supplements, they've been trained to, start with a low dose, work up, start super tiny, work up, which generally works very well with a lot of products. You want to kind of test the waters, but with ZeoCharge is actually generally the worst thing you can do because a low dose is way more likely to cause detox stress than a higher dose, right? Especially the micro doses, right? So we're talking, that's like someone that would take just a scoop of ZeoCharge, put it in water, and only drink a few sips, or drink like just yeah, like 10 sips or so, right? So that would be a micro dose, right? So we really don't recommend anything generally for like an average size person. And the dosing also generally is for someone that's, around the 150-pound mark as well. So sometimes adjustments need to be made based on weight. But generally, we don't really recommend taking less than one scoop, right? That's kind of the baseline. And then a lot of people end up needing more just based on what's going on in their body. So generally what happens with the low dose is like a micro dose is you go in, you stir stuff up, because even with a very tiny dose, it can have a powerful, effect, right? It starts stirring stuff up. It kind of makes a mess. But if there's not enough binding capacity to really finish the job, then the body's left with all these toxins that were just stirred up, and the body has to clear it on its own, right? So it can be a stressful experience. Let's say someone took a higher dose. It still kind of goes in, stirs stuff up, makes a bit of a mess, but there's extra zeolite cages available or extra binding capacity to finish the job, to bind some of that toxicity that was stirred up during the process of taking it, right? So that's the very, very, very short version. And there's more information on the site on the zeolite dosing paradox. But basically, microdoses and very low doses are much more likely to result in detox reactions than the higher doses, right? So like 10 milligrams in the dosing paradox, we talk about 10 milligrams of ZeoCharge is much more likely to result in a detox reaction than 10,000 milligrams, right? So a much, much higher dose, right? So that's just a general principle. That's what happens most of the time, but of course there are exceptions. So identifying the perfect dose, generally starting between like 1 and 6 scoops is good. And I know that's very a broad range. If someone's more sensitive, maybe starting between 2 and 6 scoops is going to be ideal, right? So the healthier someone is, the less they need, because really what's happening is ZeoCharge is going in and it's binding to the toxicity that the daily dose toxicity, the toxicity that the body is working on right now. So that's going to be from external exposure, right? So whether it's mycotoxins, environmental toxins from the air, whatever it may be, all this stuff. But then the other source is the internally produced toxic elements. So that's going to be like metabolic waste products, things like ammonia and urea, excess histamine. And then if there's microbial issues as well, maybe there's some overgrowth of yeast or bacteria, parasites, and they're releasing endotoxins and exotoxins and some of these, these waste products of those. This is all contributing to the daily dose of toxicity, right? So the more toxicity that you have going on, that your body's working on, kind of actively processing every day, the higher dose of ZeoCharge you need, because you need more binding capacity to deal with that. So someone that's relatively healthy, that doesn't have the microbial issues, that maybe they're not exposed to a lot of toxic elements or less toxic elements than other people. They're not really symptomatic. They're feeling good. Their liver's working great. Their kidneys are working. All this stuff, they're not going to need as high of a dose because they don't need as much assistance, right? So ZeoCharge is assisting the body's natural detox functions. The better your body's natural detox and the less clogged up the detox is, and the less toxicity present, the less you're going to need, right? So that's really just the key to the principle. The healthier you are, the less you need, or the less exposed you are to toxicity, the less you need, right? And the key there is it's not just external exposure, because you could be living in the middle of the woods in a very clean environment, but you could still have a very high daily dose of toxicity because of the internal production of toxicity, which really is really the main source of toxicity for a lot of people. With the metabolic waste products, and especially with the microbial issues that are produced, they're just toxin factories, basically, right? So, and then if your liver's not working properly, or just your detox organs aren't working properly, then you have more difficulty clearing those things, and that's where the higher taking more ZeoCharge can be helpful, because you're bringing in more assistance to help remove this stuff, right? So, someone that has a more complex illness, more feels like they're having detox reactions every day without even taking products, right? Because they can't even keep up with their daily dose of toxins with doing nothing, right? Those individuals might need upwards of 6 scoops starting off, right? Someone else might need 1 scoop, 2 scoops. It just depends, right? So the number one kind of the rule of thumb is, let's say you start with 1 scoop and you experience a headache the next day, or right away, maybe within 30 minutes even, then you want to double the dose or take even more, right? So that's generally the rule, because the headache is generally a sign of an inefficient detox, because it went in, stirred stuff up, but it was a little bit stressful on the body. But then if you take 2 scoops and you don't get a headache, that means, okay, that's a better dose, because now you added binding capacity. It was more of an efficient detox, right? So that's really the rule we've been using for years, is if you experience a reaction, just double your dose and then go from there. That tends to work really well. If you're concerned with reactions and you've had reactions in the past, it might be better to start with a higher dose to try to avoid that situation, because it's better not to stress the system out of it all if possible. Now, sometimes the reactions are going to be unavoidable, especially in certain people. Sometimes you can't, they're just going to happen. The goal is just to reduce the detox stress as much as possible, and to minimize, if not, eliminate the detox reactions that occur. And it just depends on the person and what they can handle with that. So there's different approaches to starting. You could start with, a very common approach is starting with 2 scoops. Right, 2 scoops is a really good starting dose, and then see how you respond. If you respond great, then you can just continue on 2 scoops. If you experience a headache, maybe go up to 4 scoops and then see how that goes, right? So that's a very common approach. The other approach is going to be starting higher and working down. So we've got, for example, the Ultimate Zeolite Experience protocol, where you start with 6 scoops per day. You do that for a full month, then you go to 5 scoops per day, etc. So that's a very good protocol. And then you could also try an accelerated version of that, where if you know you're not going to want to do that high of a dose for that long, then you could do 6 scoops for a week, then 5 scoops for a week, then 4 scoops, etc. Or you could even do 6 scoops for a day, 5 scoops the next day, etc. Right? So there's a lot of different approaches. It kind of just is figuring out what is going to work best for you. And the other idea is, with the higher dose, is it kind of depends what you're using the product for, right? So it's possible that you could take, are you using it more for symptoms relief, or are you using it more for like a deeper level detox, right? So sometimes, and are you using it in combination with other protocols, or are you using it kind of as the primary detox agent? So if you're utilizing it in combination with another protocol, and you're using something that's stimulating the release of toxic elements from tissue, and then you're using ZeoCharge as a binder, then taking it after you've kind of already stressed out the system with the other detox, and then you just go in with any amount, it should be helpful, because it's going to start binding and reducing the toxic load, right? And kind of the more that's released, maybe the more you need. But in someone that's just taking ZeoCharge kind of primarily, sometimes taking, like in certain situations, taking the higher dose could result in more symptoms if the lower dose was more just binding, but not getting to the point where it was removing some of the deeply stored toxic elements, right? Because there's, there's some toxic elements like mercury, for example, sometimes that are a little bit stubborn, and maybe it takes a few weeks, maybe it takes a couple months for the body to start letting go. And maybe the body just doesn't want to let go, because when the body, is storing these toxic elements in tissue for a reason. And it's because, when like mercury is in tissue, it's hidden to some extent from the immune system. It's kind of like a deactivated toxin. And then when it's mobilized, it's kind of activated. Now the immune system is going after it. It causes an inflammatory response, can be very stressful, right? So like when you're just exposed to mercury, then your body tries to process it. It tries to get out as much as possible. But if it can't get it all out, it has to do something because it's so stressful. It tucks it into tissue and kind of says, we'll worry about this later. And then a lot of times it just gets stuck there and the body never processes it because as it's mobilized, it's like you were just exposed. It's toxic on the way in, toxic on the way out. So now as it's mobilized, your body has that same response as when you first were exposed to it, and your body has to try to deal with it, right? So sometimes the body likes to keep toxic elements in tissue because it's more focused on, remaining balance in the short term opposed to the long-term function, even though these things are causing problems long-term, right? So the goal really is to get the body to say, okay, we have enough energy now to release some of these deeply stored toxic elements from tissue, right? So that's where the dose sometimes, the higher dose can be more effective at removing the deeply stored stuff. Because let's say you've got, let's just say 100 units, just making up a number. Let's say you have 1,000 units of circulating toxicity, just what your body's currently working on in the processing center. And then you take ZeoCharge and you bind, let's say you take 1 scoop of ZeoCharge and it binds to 25% of that, 250 units of this toxicity. And, it calms things down a little bit. Maybe you feel a little bit better because you have that assistance, but it's not quite to the point where the body's like, you know what, I have enough energy to start working on these other projects, this mercury in tissue. So then you're feeling better on it. Maybe it's improving some biomarkers on your blood work. Maybe everything's going well. But then let's say you go to 4 scoops and you bind to all of the stuff that's currently floating around. Then your body says, well, I have all this room now because I usually have to work on these 1,000 units of toxicity, but the ZeoCharge came in and took care of it for me. So now what am I going to do with this extra energy? And then it says, okay, let's let go of some of this mercury and whatever else from tissue because now there's room to work on it. So then room to receive it and energy to work on it. So then it releases it and then bam, you have all of this mercury, and then potentially that could be an initial stressful experience because it was tucked away so long and now all of a sudden it's been mobilized, right? So that's one situation where taking a higher dose could potentially result in a detox reaction where the lower dose doesn't. If the lower dose is more of a binding dose, but it's not getting the body to release the stubborn toxicity like the mercury, right? So and that happens sometimes. So sometimes you'll be on ZeoCharge for a month, 2 months, everything's going great, and then all of a sudden you might experience some reactions. And maybe that's because your body's getting to another level of detox and it's saying it's releasing some deeply stored stuff, right? So that's a possibility. That does happen sometimes. And then sometimes as well with, like the more you're taking, and if you have a lot of microbial issues, a lot of, parasitic overgrowth and things, the more you take, the more kind of biofilms are disrupted, the more of those microbes are released as well. And sometimes there's an initial purging event where potentially there could be, some diarrhea, maybe some vomiting. Not necessarily bad reactions, but it's just, getting some of this stuff out quickly. And in those situations, sometimes taking more can result in increased purging events or an increased reaction because you're just mobilizing some of those microbial organisms so quickly, right? So that's where sometimes it takes a little bit of trial and error, finding the right dose. But even just taking a microdose, like we did a sip challenge where people took a scoop of ZeoCharge, mixed it with a glass of water, and they just took a sip. And then, some of them experienced reactions. So those people that experienced reactions the next day did the same thing, scoop of ZeoCharge and water, drank the whole glass, no reaction, right? So it's just showing that it's, even at the very, very low dose, it can definitely stir stuff up and cause reactions, but then the higher dose can be a more efficient detox, right? So we don't want necessarily reactions because the reaction it means it's doing something, but it doesn't mean it's better than if you get no reaction. Because ideally, if you can remove deeply stored toxic elements from your body without feeling anything at all, without feeling worse, without feeling better, that's the ideal situation because you're getting stuff out, you're getting healthier, but you're not having the stress of the detox. That's what makes ZeoCharge so unique. It's able to do that in so many people. I mean, feeling better is a bonus, right? And it just, like I said, it depends what you're using for. If you're using it for symptoms management and if it's making you feel better, that's one thing. If you're using it to remove deeply stored stuff from your body, sometimes you're not going to feel better right away. And that's more of a long-term progression, whereas you remove this stuff from, the central nervous system or whatever, you start feeling better. So that's why I like it. It's working for everyone because everyone has some sort of toxic element or toxicity for it to bind to. So it's binding to something. The question is just, is it going to work for, what your goal is for the symptoms kind of management or what you want it to work towards. So anyway, So that's where, there are a couple of caveats with the dosing. So sometimes it takes a little experimentation, but yeah, like if you take, the microdose, one sip, it doesn't necessarily mean it's like, oh, this is removing deeply stored metals from my brain. It might just be biofilm disruption or something kind of in the body's, like it could just be in the gut even, and it could still result in like brain fog or some sort of issue because of the inflammation caused by that. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's like mercury coming out of the brain, right? So that sometimes can be deceiving for people when they take other detox products and they're like, oh, this is working incredible because I'm getting these reactions. What might just be because you've stirred stuff up and stressed things out. So it's getting to the point where you're having an efficient detox. Your body's releasing stuff at its own pace, and you're able to. And that's the goal. It's just that some people are going to have reactions no matter what they do. So that's why this, it takes a little bit of experimentation. Also, it's usually good to do what you feel comfortable with. So if you're absolutely terrified of taking, 6 scoops and you are sure that it's going to cause a reaction, then it's probably best not to do that because you want to do what you're comfortable with, and maybe, just go and talk to other people who have done it, educate yourself, work with a practitioner, and find out what you think is going to be best for you and what you're comfortable with. Maybe it's 2 scoops. Maybe, after education, you say, okay, maybe I should do 6 scoops, right? So it's just work doing what you think is best. So what happens if you experience a detox reaction, right? So let's say you start with 2 scoops and then, 30 minutes later, an hour later, you get a reaction. So there's a couple approaches. One is just to take more right away. That's generally what works the best, because now you've got, the stuff stirred up, your body's processing it. That's why you're getting the reactions. So just take another, if you took 2 scoops, take another 2 scoops immediately. And usually that's going to help. Now, it's not going to be as good as if you would have taken 4 scoops initially, because you've already kind of irritated things and caused, a little bit of an inflammatory reaction. But, taking more right away usually is helpful. The other option, if you don't want to do that, is just to wait. And then the next day, instead of doing 2 scoops, go to 4 scoops, right? So that's an option as well. Kind of up to you on that one. And then, and it's really what you're comfortable with. Like if you feel like, okay, you need to go off of it, that's okay too. Sometimes what happens though is if you start taking it and then you did get a big, like if your body just started dumping toxic elements immediately, and I kind of call it the toxin tumble, right? All this stuff just got stirred up. And then if you don't take it the next day because you wanted to see how you feel, sometimes you feel worse because now you've stirred this stuff up, but your body has to clear it on its own and you don't have the binder, right? So we generally don't recommend starting it and then just going off after a day or two, because you've kind of started this detox process. You want to continue coming in with the binder to assist the body with the removal of that, usually for, at least a few weeks or a month or whatever. So, but it's all, it's all based on what you feel you need to be doing as well. Some of the principles to help you avoid detox reactions. One is if you're worried about the reactions and you're more prone to them, it's generally better to start taking the product after a meal opposed to on an empty stomach, especially in the morning, right? So if you're worried about the reaction, start, after dinner. Take whatever dose, 2, 4, 6 scoops, whatever you're going to take it after dinner. That's less likely to result in a reaction. If you don't want to take it at night, take it after lunch. But taking it first thing in the morning on an empty stomach is the most likely to result in detox reactions. The other thing is don't start it right before the full moon. I'm not going to get into the whole full moon thing here, but things, the body, there's different responses in the body during the full moon, right? So there's more microbial activity, parasitic activity. There's hormone fluctuations. There's things that happen, and people are much more likely to experience detox reactions on ZeoCharge around the full moon. And this is actually very common. A lot of people will start the product, they're feeling great for a couple weeks, and then the full moon hits, and bam, they get a detox reaction. This happens quite commonly. So it's just because things are shifting, and there's more likely to result. Maybe it's parasites being excreted. Maybe it's enhanced detox. Whatever it is, that's not uncommon. So if you're concerned about reactions, wait till a few days after the full moon to start it. Don't start it like 2 or 3 days before the full moon, because it's just more likely, especially to result in some sort of purging event, right? So the other consideration is you could be taking, let's say 2 scoops is working great for you, and you're on that, and a couple weeks in you start getting reactions. The body just goes in different cycles of detox, and sometimes things just happen, and it's not because you did anything different, it's because the body's cycling through different phases, right? So maybe during those times, sometimes it's better to raise the dose temporarily. Like when you become more symptomatic, maybe raise the dose and then go back down to 2. Like you sometimes have to cycle back and forth. Or let's say your 2 scoops is working great for you, but then you go and you're exposed to mold or something. It's like, okay, maybe you need to take a double dose for a little while to help calm things down from that exposure, right? So it's the more toxicity that you are exposed to, the more that you're going to need, type of thing. And then as you calm things down and as you become less toxic and as your body starts working better, then you need less over time as well, right? So those are kind of the principles. So starting between 2 and 6, as you get healthier, needing less, and then as you're working your way down, if you start experiencing reactions, when you say you start on 4 scoops, everything's great, then you get down to 1 scoop, start getting headaches consistently, then it might be time to go back up, because maybe that's not enough to for an efficient detox, right? So the goal is to have the most efficient detox as possible, reduce the detox symptoms, and getting all the stuff out of your body and binding effectively and reducing the stress load in the body. So that's the dosing guide. Hope this was helpful, everyone. Happy detoxing.